So we are back with another versus. This time around, it is going to be moss poles versus cocoa chip poles. Our very first versus that we did was perlite versus fluval, and that was interesting. I think you guys really liked it, so I wanted to experiment with something else. We know that poles and poling our plants can be a bit of a chore, so we want to make sure we're using the best possible substrate, using the best method that's going to be worth our time. So I'm going to take you back to when I first started with these plants, comparing them on the poles, and then I'll bring you to today and what they look like today. And I'm probably going to disassemble them with you today so we can really see what the true results were here. So let's jump back to October 22nd when I first initially potted up these plants. We have our original versus competitors, our philodendron esmeraldans that we compared the perlite to fluvals. My champions, I am in love with this plant. Let me make sure we're in focus because last time I did this, that's frozen. I can't even tell. Hopefully it's in focus. But it has aerial roots that are just ready to do something. So now's the time. We're gonna get this on a pole. Here's some other ones here. This really pretty variegated heartleaf philodendron, which I really like. My majestic. I have waited way too long to put this on a pole. We have my pink princess who's doing well. Like, it really bounced back. I thought it was gonna die all the way back after the move because it really went downhill. And then my Paraiso Verde. Look at this. This is the newest leaf, but this one is my favorite. So gorgeous. So this versus started off with all of the plants on lazy poles, and usually when you do an experiment you have to have a variable and the non-variable, right? Like, so the lazy poles were supposed to be the non-variable, but we ended up having to make some adjustments I will explain more in the future. But at that time I really did not want to unpot all of the plants just to add poles. So with the lazy poles I just added a bamboo stake and tied it together with a zip tie so that it could be somewhat stable in the pot. So that's what we did, but I was pretty skeptical because the cocoa chips were super chunky. You can see the ones that I ended up getting and using were very chunky. And so the lazy pole, if you're not familiar, is open on the front and just has plastic straps every few, leaves. So the cocoa chips dried out very quickly, or I at that time thought that they would dry out very quickly. I didn't know yet, but that's what I was hypothesizing would happen. So I knew that I was probably gonna have to make some adjustments. So that brings us to 2 weeks later, November 6th, in this next clip. So it has been about 2 weeks and I did decide to get some different cocoa chips because this one here is drying out quite quickly and I'm not really about that every other day watering life. So I'm gonna change out the poles for these cocoa chip ones. I got smaller, finer cocoa chips. So I'm gonna change out all the poles that have the cocoa chips. And before we do that, I'll give you guys an update on all of the plants. And the Paraiso did put out a new leaf, oddly really small with no variegation. I'm not sure what's going on with there. I've had like perfect leaf after perfect leaf with this plant, and suddenly it gave me this leaf and I kept it in the same exact spot. I don't know what that's about. The esmeraldans that's in cocoa chips is putting out a new leaf as well, but I'm pretty sure there's no nodes have woken up or no new roots there because this is dry as ever. I already knew maybe 2 days after setting this all up, and I saw how the cocoa chips dried up and I saw how difficult it was for me to rehydrate it. I said, yeah, this is not working. This put out a gorgeous leaf here. The moss is still moist, and I want to say I maybe rehydrated it one time within the past 2 weeks. We are getting some new roots though on this here, and it is right there at the bottom. So this is already starting to root into the pole. After I did this whole thing, I was really tired when I was doing all this. I actually never intended to put this on a pole, but we're here now, so I'm gonna leave it. It did put out this pretty leaf. So yeah, it's doing pretty good. This one's doing good. I think that's the only one that's showing progress, to be honest, in terms of rooting into the moss pole. My majestic is working on another leaf. I'm just looking on the back to see. I don't see any new roots on the back of this pole just yet. Nothing just yet. And yeah, we do need to add some more moss though. And I probably need to pull off the old sheath cover there. You can see through the pole here to allow it to have direct contact with the pole. So I'm going to try to do that best I can as well. I'll do that off camera so I don't bore you guys. What other plant did we do? Oh, we had the other Esmeraldans in moss, and no action there, surprisingly. Well, these, if you guys remember, were, ow, I just smacked myself in the face with a leaf. These were very, very early pole attachments, and so for this, we're probably gonna have to wait for the second leaf to actually see something going on. But again, I think I watered this one time within the past 2 weeks. So this is the only way that I'm ever gonna use moss and moss poles is with plastic. You'll see the one that I got for the cocoa chips is like your typical fabricated pole. I don't know how well it's gonna stay hydrated, but we'll see. Pink Princess put out this leaf since you guys saw it last, and I think it's already working on another one. This is a pretty fast grower. I don't see any new roots either. There, at least it's not reaching the back of the pole yet, and the plant you can see is right towards the front of the moss. So there might be roots in there, but we're not seeing it through the back of the pole yet. So no signs yet, but the leaves are looking a nice size compared to these lower ones here. So this one is actually looking really nice. And something I'm going to throw in here that we didn't start with is this varicosum, because the moss is disgusting. I'm finally tired of looking at it like that, so we have to do something about it. So I have two in the smaller fiber coco coir or cocoa chips, and then two in the larger fiber cocoa chips. This one is so not stable. The most stable is the one that I sunk all the way in the container, obviously. And this one's actually pretty stable too, so it's just my Pariso that's not very stable. So that brings us to the next update in January, and here I actually unpotted the plants and unassembled the moss poles or the cocoa poles so that we could really see what that growth was looking like. And so starting off first with the Pariso Verde, it was in the chunky cocoa chip, and it did pretty good. It rooted at every node, maybe not the very first one, but every node it had multiple roots coming out. It wasn't like significantly long, but each node was enough that if I needed to chop and prop or chop and extend, it was definitely more than enough. The only thing that I didn't like with this plant is that the internodal space got really long and it was not cute, and the top two leaves were almost completely green, but that was pretty much due to the fact that I started this in the winter time, and if you don't know, Pariso Verdes need a lot of highlight and high temperature in order to keep its beautiful color, so that all started to deteriorate right when I put it on this pole. So no fault of the pole, but I did have to end up chopping it so that I could get more of what I was wanting the plant to look like. So I would say that that was a success. Then next we had the Esmeraldans, the OGs from the Versus. They're from back when we did the Fluo versus Perlite, and those did pretty good too. We had one in Chunky Cocoa, which I honestly, because it's a small plant, it was really like early to put that plant on a pole. It's still rooted into the cocoa chip, which surprised me because the cocoa chip, even though it's so chunky that, you know, it doesn't hold moisture as well, but it was enough for this little vine, you know, plant, this early baby plant to root into the pole, and it gave a decent, you know, amount of root growth there, several inches of root, where if you wanted to chop and extend or what have you, it was more than enough. And it gave us a new leaf on that pole. The one that was on the moss pole, it was the tiniest little moss lazy pole because again, it was so early. There was really only one node on that new moss pole, but it rooted extremely well. It did root more than the cocoa chip, and that's because it grew through the pole and down into the substrate where it continued to grow. So it gave a really long root and it was very successful. Also gave us a new leaf on that pole. So I would say that it's a draw. Even though the root on the moss pole came out much longer than the one on the cocoa chip still gave a significant length root that I would still call that a success. You know, both of them worked well. Next was the chia pens, and that one was not as good as I expected. So that was on the microchip pole, and as you can see, the top two nodes, they rooted fine, and those were the ones that grew, like those nodes or growth points grew while it was already on the pole. And the lower one, you can see the third one from the top, how short it is. And that was a root that when I first put it on the pole, it was juicy, it was ready to be, you know, put up onto a pole. It was fresh, but it's, as you can see, it's black and it started to shrivel up inside. And I believe that it was because that microchip is really hard to get evenly moist, and so that combination with that new fresh root just wasn't. Come here. Sit. Stay. Thank you. I didn't really care for the results of the one on the microchip pole, so yeah, you be the judge on that one. Next is the variegated philodendron, and that was on a lazy moss pole, and that one did perfectly fine. The top node, which was the newest node, had not had enough time yet to root, but that middle part rooted very well. It branched off, it was extensive. I was able to chop it at that time and make 2 other plants. Ironically, the top cut, which usually roots really easy when you chop and prop it, it's still not rooted to this day. And to this day, as in like today is March 11th, and it's still not rooted. I don't know why. I had it in perlite and it almost rotted. Then I chopped it and put it back into perlite. Still wasn't rooting. I put it into water probably a week ago and it still has no roots. I don't know, but that mid cut is flourishing, putting out new leaves, and it's perfectly fine. Either way, that was on the lazy moss pole and it did perfectly fine. It gave a more extensive root system, I would say. Next is the pink princess. And the pink princess, or did we talk about the verrucosum? Maybe it's the verrucosum that's next. Let's see. Yep, it's the verrucosum. The verrucosum was in microchips. And again, I mean, honestly, it did better than I expected. I expected it to do nothing at all because of what I mentioned before, how hard it is to keep it evenly moist. However, that second node, it did root significantly well. It gave a good few inches of root that you would for sure be able to do something with. However, I ended up rotting the actual plant, like the base of the plant, the main root system, just because I overwatered it and there was too much, the water level was too high in the container. Thankfully it was on a pole, so we were able to keep some roots on that plant, and I had to just chop and repot, but it's getting its life together in perlite at this time. Next is the pink princess. So this one was kind of I've had this plant for a lot longer than these other plants. So when I put it onto the moss pole, I'm not gonna lie, I did think that it was gonna do more, but thinking back now, the plant was a little bit older, like I mentioned, and so those nodes might have been a little calloused over. So if you're putting a plant that you've had for a while, it's a little more established, on a pole, you might want to check the nodes, make sure they're not calloused over, remove any of the woody, tissue or sheath that might be over the node, because it did not root anywhere on any of those older nodes. The only part that rooted was where new leaves came out when it was already on the pole. So keep that in mind. And so it was okay. It wasn't, I would not say it was like a great success. It was okay. Last and certainly not least, my favorite, the Philodendron Majestic, which probably did the best out of all of these in terms of extensive root growth, and that was on a lazy moss pole as well. Each node, I believe each node rooted, maybe one didn't. And it wasn't just like, oh, it put out a root or two. It's like each node that did root put out significant, like branched off root systems. The leaves started to size up, not significantly, but it grew the most leaves within the time frame, and it just looked great. It was really, really beautiful. So because of all that growth, I was able to chop it several times and repot them all into a new pot and put them all up on a new pole so that all the vines can grow up together and I can have a nice little wall of Majestic. So we're in the process of growing that now. So in terms of winners of this versus moss versus coco, I honestly am gonna go with the coco. I prefer coco chips because of how easy it is to disassemble the plants from it. I don't have to sit there for a while removing moss from the roots, and it's actually still successful. You may not get full on branched off root systems with the coco, but it still works, and it's still, enough for you to cut, to chop and prop. Now, in terms of actually sizing sizing up leaves, this little experiment was only 3-month period time, and it was only over the winter months. So in terms of actually sizing up your leaves, I would need to try this again over the growing period, like from spring to summer, and then see, you know, like which would give me the most sizing up of leaves, which I'm probably gonna do an update and show you guys that, like which one sized up the best, because I pretty much have all of those plants on most of the same substrates. Whatever was on microchips, I took that off because I just didn't like how dusty and messy, and it just wasn't as successful to me. But I'll give you guys an update at the end of the summer and see like who sized up the most leaves, you know, because I do have some they doing something. They definitely doing something over there. So yeah, for sizing up, I'm gonna say that you're probably gonna want to go with the moss, even though I haven't tried it yet. That's just what I hypothesize. In terms of extensive root growth, you probably want to go with the moss, but in terms of ease of care, ease of disassembling, definitely the cocoa chips. It still works and it's easier to use. Now we did have another variable of the type of poles, and that was the lazy pole versus the prefab. And again, it just depends what you're looking for. Like the lazy pole to me looks better. It's more inconspicuous. You don't really notice it, you know, behind your plant, versus the prefab pole where it's more noticeable. And if you don't like the way they look, that could be a con. For me, I don't really like the way the prefab poles look. So I prefer the lazy pole, but I also don't like putting the lazy pole together. It's not hard, it just takes time. I believe I have a video showing me putting one together. I will link that somewhere. If not, I will also link Charmaine from Unplanned Parenthood. That's where I learned it from. And it's not hard to put it together, but it takes a little time. And then with the lazy pole, you have to come back and maintain it. So you have to come back and add more moss later on. And for me, I'm an on-the-go plant parent. Like I just in the middle of the week see that something needs something and I just do it real quick. So for me, having to pull out the moss, I might make a mess, and it deters me. It deters me a little bit, the lazy pole, even though it's supposed to be lazy. Like for lazy people, it's still not lazy enough for me. The prefab pole is a set it and forget it, and so I literally just fill it usually halfway, if not all the way, if I have enough substrate, and I literally don't have to worry about maintaining it besides watering it. Whereas, you know, the lazy pole is an on-the-go thing, as it grows type of thing, and it does look better, but there's pros and cons to everything, guys. So just consider all of that. And honestly, at this point, I really wouldn't choose one over the other. I have some on prefab poles, I have some on lazy poles, because some are better for other things. Like your smaller baby plants may be better for a lazy pole versus a prefab pole. And maybe your larger or bigger plants that need a little more support maybe need to be on a prefab pole. So that is all for this versus. You guys let me know in the comments below, who was the winner for you? Would you choose the moss or the cocoa chips? Would you choose a lazy pole or a prefab pole? Or are you kind of like me where there's a purpose for everything, and so you would probably use both? So I hope that you found this video helpful or informative. If you did, please consider pressing the like button or letting me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next one.